The big story this week is about a huge step forward in the fulfillment of one of the scariest yet ultimately hopeful prophetic passages in the entire Bible. A virulently anti-Israel candidate has won the Democratic nomination to be Michigan's next senator, and Israel is also coming under tremendous pressure to accept another so-called peace deal in Gaza, even as Hamas brazenly prepares for another round of fighting. Speaking of another round of fighting, Iran has received hundreds of anti-aircraft missiles from China and has issued a list of demands America must agree to before it opens the Strait of Hormuz, while also cyber-attacking the United States infrastructure. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. We're going to start the report this week by talking about an event in my home state of Michigan. This past week, the Democratic Party held primaries in this state to decide, among other things, who would be the party's nominee for Senate in the upcoming elections. That nomination was won by Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who was born in Detroit, just like I was, but much more recently. Dr. El-Sayed is a graduate of Columbia University's medical school, and he is also matriculated at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. In many ways, he is an all-American success story, being the offspring of Egyptian immigrants who came to the United States to try and build a better life than what was available to them in their homeland. However, Dr. El-Sayed has also been linked to the Muslim American Society, which Congress called a, quote, overt arm, end quote, of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. It is also a matter of public record that many other franchises of the Muslim Brotherhood all over the world have issued statements applauding El-Sayed's candidacy. This is almost certainly also influenced by the fact that in his campaign to clinch the nomination, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee spent a record $70 million to try and defeat him, and his primary opponent heavily criticized him for his anti-Israel positions. None of that seems to have been a big problem for El-Sayed or the Democratic Party leadership. Now, I'm going to switch briefly to commentary mode and say once again that I've never claimed to be a prophet, but I'm going to make a prediction. If El-Sayed wins the general election in November and becomes Michigan's next senator, he will at the same time become an instant frontrunner to run for president on the Democratic Party's ticket in 2032. It's even possible that he'll be picked to be the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket in 2028. As unthinkable as that might be for you and me, there are many things about his personal, cultural, and political profile which make him exactly what Democratic voters these days, particularly younger people, say they're looking for these days. The prophecies in the Bible say that at some point, towards the end of this age, all the nations, that is, all the nations of this earth will be against Jerusalem and Israel. That includes the United States, and this is how it could happen. Now, speaking of biblical prophecy, some of you are probably getting tired of hearing me talk about the prophetic verses of Ezekiel chapters 38 to 39. But I'm afraid this week we have seen a big step taken in the direction of those prophecies coming to pass. It happened in Mecca, the holiest city in Islam, in the Hijaz region of eastern Saudi Arabia. This past Friday, senior officials from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey came together in that city to sign an alliance which includes a provision strikingly similar to NATO's Article 5, which declares that an attack on one ally is an attack on all of them. However, there seemed to be some ambiguity over where they expect a potential attack to come from and why. However, it comes in the wake of an ongoing war with Iran, which has seen the Gulf Arab countries coming under fire from Iranian missiles and drones, which have done immense physical and economic damage to Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region. The alliance with the United States, which these countries maintained for decades, has not spared them from all this, as the military bases of the United States built in these countries were actually used by Iran to justify their attacks. Many of the weapons fired at these bases missed and hit civilian infrastructure instead, causing dozens of casualties and billions of dollars in damage. But getting back to the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 to 39, they describe an invasion of the land of Israel, which will come from all directions, north, south, east, and southwest. Geographic regions coinciding with the modern-day nations of Russia, Turkey, Iran, as well as many nations from around the Middle East and northeastern Africa are described as the source of these attacks. Turkey in particular is a central player in this alliance, and that fact puzzled students of biblical prophecy for many years because Turkey recognized Israel in 1950 and was for many years a close military, diplomatic, political, and economic ally of the Jewish state. It has also been on the side of Israel in the West against Russia, and has also never been very friendly with Iran, even before the 1979 Islamic Revolution there. But as I've said before in these reports, that began to change in 2003 with the election of President Recep Erdogan, whose AKP party is a political franchise of the Muslim Brotherhood, just as Hamas is a military franchise of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that ain't Kentucky Fried Chicken, my friends. Now, with this new alliance, it has just formed with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I would have to say a large step has been taken in the direction of Ezekiel 38 to 39 being fulfilled. Stay tuned for more, there's no doubt about it. Two really important points need to be kept in mind here. The first is that Turkey has already built a patronage network that includes both governments and sub-state actors in several countries all over the Middle East and northeastern Africa. The theme that runs through all these alliances is that they are all franchises of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they are all deeply sympathetic to Hamas and deeply opposed to Israel. This is also what has the potential to be at least a temporary marriage of convenience between this new alliance and Iran. Now, on that point, just one day after the signing of the agreement last Friday, Pakistan's Defense Minister Khawaja Asif gave an interview with a Pakistani media outlet in his country in which he said that, quote, Israel is a threat to the entire Muslim world, unquote, adding that in the context of Israel, all Muslim nations must unite. I have no doubt about this. Well, Asif, who in the past has called Israel evil and a curse for humanity, also blamed it for the wars that Muslim states have fought against each other over the decades, presumably including the recent Iranian attacks on Arab Gulf states. He thus reiterated his opinion that Muslim countries must put aside their differences and stand together as one against Israel. In other words, he's calling for precisely what Ezekiel 38 to 39 is describing. Opposition to Israel and a desire to invade and destroy it is the one thing that all the nations mentioned in this passage might be able to agree on, even after the wars they've fought with each other in recent years and the conflicting interests they still have. Now, this includes the announcement this past week by Iran that it will not agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for unfettered passage until the United States agrees to their utterly insane cuckoo list of demands. It includes a complete U.S. military withdrawal from the Middle East, paying reparations for the damage done to Iran's military and civilian infrastructure in the recent wars, sanctions relief, and the unfreezing of Iranian financial assets in banks around the world. This is an absolute non-starter, and it means that the likelihood of renewed conflict with Iran, possibly including renewed missile attacks on Arab countries and Israel, is inevitable and might have already started by the time you watch this video. But don't sit around thinking about it, we need to keep praying. This is also likely to include renewed missile strikes on Israel from the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and possibly also Shiite militias based in Iraq and elsewhere. Now, friends, even if that doesn't happen in the immediate time frame, Ezekiel 38 to 39 tells us that at some point, Israel will be targeted by a massive force coming from all directions. Although the prophecy tells us that God will miraculously intervene to save his chosen people, that does not mean it will be an easy time here in the Promised Land. That's why here at Vision for Israel, we're continuing to do everything we can to help prepare the people of this country for the difficult days we know are coming. We're supplying bomb safety shelters well over 500 by now, to communities all over the country, as well as supplies and equipment to medical first responders, firefighters, and security teams. So if you want to know more, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com. And I want to encourage you to watch this video once again and consider what you can do with Vision for Israel. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. Now in the second half of the report, we're going to take a look at the situation in the Gaza Strip, where the so-called Board of Peace has presented a 15-point plan to move forward with Hamas's disarmament and the IDF's withdrawal from the territory. On Sunday, Prime Minister Netanyahu flatly rejected the 15-point plan. And on Monday morning, a senior Hamas official announced that the terrorist group is flatly refusing to give up its weapons. I pity the diplomats who have to keep up appearances and pretend that this process is going anywhere, or that the underlying issues which led to this war starting in the first place are getting closer to resolution. I'm glad no one ever asked me to sit on the Board of Peace and make these ridiculous statements about the only way forward is for both sides to take steps that they both consider to be tantamount to suicide. Although I have no sympathy for Hamas, I think it's absurd for anyone to expect them to disarm voluntarily, since carrying out violent attacks against Israel is their entire reason for existing in the first place. Hatred of Jews, which is demonic, and rejection of Israel, which is demonic, are the foundational building blocks of their worldview, and their weapons are an essential part of their identity. Expecting them to give that up in return for the promise of future economic prosperity was never going to work, and no one should be surprised that these roadblocks are coming up. Wake up, guys. For Israel's part, withdrawing from the security zone inside the Strip and allowing Hamas to once again come up to the fence separating Gaza from Israeli civilian communities is also a non-starter. And no one should be surprised by this. Hamas has pledged itself to wage endless war against Israel until it completely destroys us. And Israel has pledged to continue defending itself against attacks as long as they keep coming. But attempts by the international community to come in and mediate this conflict and try to find a way for everyone to win is a big part of why this part of the world continues to be so dysfunctional. I don't see it changing before Yeshua returns, and maybe that's why Revelation chapter 22 verse 20 says, quote, "He which testifieth these things saith, Surely I come quickly. Amen. Even so come, Lord Jesus." To that I say an emphatic amen, and now let's switch back to news mode. The next news item is just a quick mention of the developments this week regarding Iran and the ongoing lingering possibility that hostilities might once again erupt and this time pull Israel back into the fighting. Now, President Trump seems to have given up on the idea of using force to make Iran comply with his demands, and instead opted for a longer-term strategy of blockading Iran's maritime trade in and out of the Persian Gulf. Now, this has advantages and disadvantages, with the main advantage being that there's no active shooting going on, while the pace of tanker traffic in and out of the Gulf slow, but not completely stopped. However, the main disadvantage is that Iran's regime has proven that it can withstand a lot of hardships and doesn't care much about its own civilian population, which bears the brunt of the problems caused by the American blockade. The Iranian economy has been in shambles for many years, and the quality of life available to ordinary Iranians is very poor. But the regime is not bothered by that. They continue to devote the majority of their time and resources to war, reportedly receiving shipments this week of Chinese-built anti-aircraft missiles. So what's left of Iran's military forces might not have any food to eat, but at least they've got missiles. However, there are some things even this evil regime can't ignore, and that includes the massive environmental problems Iran is facing. The terrible heat, droughts, and wildfires that have been plaguing many parts of the world this summer have also been hitting Iran, although it hasn't been covered much in the Western media. Why bother CNN and you others? There are once again quiet rumblings about the possible need to evacuate the capital city of Tehran as supplies of water and electricity run low. But the same question always follows these rumblings. Where could Tehran's 12 million residents possibly go? Israel? The entire country is facing the same problems. However, the IRGC apparently still has enough electricity to run its massive cyber warfare project, as several U.S. states have reported problems with their water supplies that were caused by malicious internet attacks that analysts say probably originated in Iran. Now let's move on to another big story making headlines in Israel this week: the steady emigration of tens of thousands of our most highly educated, skilled, and productive citizens. According to a recent study conducted by Israel Tax Authority's Planning and Economics Division, around 50,000 Israelis left the country for at least 3 months in 2025, which is the third year in a row we've seen similar numbers. The report further breaks down the statistics to show that most of the people leaving Israel are medical professionals, engineers, and other highly skilled workers, often in the prime of their careers. This is a story that makes me very sad, people, even though I understand what is motivating this outward exodus. Life has been very difficult in Israel for several years now, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, which came amidst a political crisis which saw 5 national elections in just 4 years. Then, when we finally managed to elect a stable governing coalition, that coalition immediately launched into an agenda which included highly contentious issues, including judicial reform, which led to massive street protests and social upheaval. Then, just when that issue was threatening to really tear the country apart, the October 7th attacks happened, kicking off the largest and longest war in our modern history, which still isn't over. The quality of life available to people here in Israel is on a downward trajectory. And if I was a doctor of a computer engineer who spoke English and could relocate to California, why would I do that? Or London, and get a well-paying job, I might be very tempted to do that. If enough of these folks leave Israel, those of us who remain will have to pay even more taxes and do without even more government services, all while continuing to fight this war of survival that has been thrust upon us by our enemies. It's not getting any easier to be an Israeli, and that's why here at Vision for Israel, we're committed to doing everything we possibly can to support families and communities in distress. So if you want to know more, please watch our website, visionforisrael.com, and please look at this short video. God bless you and shalom.
For years, Vision for Israel has been hosting the Holocaust survivors and terror victims and widows and orphans and children at risk, at high risk. And of course, that after the October 7th, people were really in distress. And a lot of the Holocaust survivors, they had this kind of bad pictures from the past that would come back to them. And many of them were having to deal with their emotional state of being in depression and being not able to cope with the horrible tragedies that took place. So we initiated to inviting them again to do these musical mornings. And what we do is we bring a musician, we bring food, they're doing dancing and everything. And it's just a very light, enjoyable time. And I tell you, when they come to us, most of them are telling us that when they come, they just feel peace. They just feel joy. And they said, you know, something is very special about your place. We just love coming to your place. Please invite us again. And it was like always repeating the same thing.
I think one of the great things about serving the Holocaust survivors is as they are getting older very quickly, 10 to 15,000 of the survivors are passing on into eternity every year. And so we owe a great debt to this generation of Holocaust survivors who we want to keep their memories, their biographies, their history alive. And when we host an event for the Holocaust survivors, I'm reminded of the words that I love so much in Job chapter 29, verse 13. It says, "The blessing of a perishing man came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy." And whenever the Holocaust survivors come, many of them who are widows and widowers, of course, are these elderly women who love to dance, who love to grab my arms and just swing me around. And I'm amazed at the energy that they have to dance and to sing and to have fun and to make the most out of life, which I think is so rewarding, such a blessing for us. We've even been able to dedicate ambulances that we donated to the service of Israel in order to make and uplift their own countenance and happy to be part of something giving back to the community. So it really is a blessing, and I think we owe the Holocaust survivors a great debt and to keep their memories alive. Welcome back, friends. Now we're almost out of time for this week's report, so I'll just quickly run through some other big stories making headlines in Israel this week. As regular viewers know, I have a tradition of ending these reports with some good news. And this week, there's several pieces of good news to end on. Yay! First, Israeli chess Grandmaster Boris Gelfand has been named to be the next inductee to the World Chess Hall of Fame in St. Louis, Missouri. Previous inductees include such legendary names as Emanuel Lasker, Mikhail Tal, Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, and Judith Polgar. Wow, that's amazing. Gelfand made Aliyah to Israel from Belarus in 1998, where my grandmother came from, after winning a gold medal at the 1990 Chess Olympiad as a member of the Soviet team. In 2009, he became the first and so far only Israeli to win the Chess World Cup. He continued playing international chess competitions for many years, winning several more honors, and now his name is going to be in the Hall of Fame. Another Israeli who is doing well in the international competitive arena is Anand Khalili, who will soon sign with the Crystal Palace Football Club of the English Premier League. Wow, that's incredible. The 21-year-old Khalili was born in Haifa and has played several seasons with the Israel national team. Now he is being offered a contract worth a reported 28 million euros, or $32.5 million presently. This will make him the most highly paid Israeli professional athlete ever, and it will also make him the only Israeli athlete currently playing in the English Premier League, which is the most prestigious soccer league in the world. Finally, the French beauty products chain Sephora announced this past week that it will soon be opening branch stores in Tel Aviv, Ramat Gan, and Jerusalem. The stores will reportedly be operated by local Israeli cosmetics franchisee Glam42 and offer a line of products previously unavailable in Israel. Now, this might seem like a small thing, friends, and in the grand scheme of things, maybe it is. But as I said before, Israel has been through a tough few years, and a lot of international businesses have pulled out of this country, taking thousands of jobs with them, along with many products and services that Israelis have grown accustomed to having available to them. The fact that some businesses are beginning to move back is a signal that this trend might soon be reversed, and that's encouraging to a people who badly need encouragement. On that note, I want to conclude this conclusion with a bit of commentary on where things stand here in Israel as the summer of 2026 winds down. To start out with, the reports we keep getting from all over the world of a rise in anti-Semitism are very disturbing, especially as they're not just at street level anymore, but they're coming from the halls of power in government, academia, and civil society. On top of that, we have all the ongoing difficulties we're experiencing here at home due to the lingering effects of the war, as well as political, cultural, and social disagreements. I didn't really want to talk in this episode about the upcoming elections in this report because there's not much to talk about yet. Some polls have been published, but as I've said before, those polls are notoriously unreliable. But there's no question that this election cycle is already very contentious, and plenty of angry, frustrated, and belligerent rhetoric is being thrown around. In other words, there's plenty to be discouraged by, and there's plenty of things our enemies can point to and take comfort from. But as the late respected Billy Graham once was fond of saying, as dark as it may seem now, we've read the back of the book and we know who wins. And with that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another episode of VFI News from Israel. Shalom.